It spread across star systems like a storm of whispers. An entire people had been wiped away. At first, most citizens of Earth thought it was just another political rumor. The stars were full of rivalries, and often leaders accused each other of horrible things just to gain power. But this time the reports were too detailed to ignore. Ships belonging to a weaker species had vanished. Colonies where families once lived were now silent. Communication channels carried only static where laughter and voices used to be. The Alien Council, a grand collection of powerful civilizations, held meetings about it. They sat in their shining halls filled with symbols of culture and pride, and they debated with polished words. They said they would investigate further. They said they would monitor the situation, but they never said they would stop it. On Earth, the reaction was very different. Ordinary people were horrified. Images and testimonies began to leak. Refugees showing up at border stations, broken ships arriving half dead, telling stories of cities erased in fire. The words were simple, but they cut deep. Our children are gone. Our homes are gone. No one came to help. People across Earth gathered in front of screens, watching live coverage. In crowded cities and quiet villages, there was the same question in every heart. How could this be happening again? The governments of Earth had spent years trying to prove themselves as cultured in the eyes of the galaxy. Humanity had worked hard to show that it had grown beyond its violent past. They built art museums in orbit, created joint projects with other planets, and sent music, literature, and philosophy across the stars. Humans wanted to be respected not as warriors, but as builders of beauty. But now beauty felt powerless. When Earth's representatives stood in the council and begged for action, the chamber fell into silence. Some alien leaders nodded politely, but most looked bored. A few even smirked. They told Earth in careful words that this was not their concern. They said interfering in the internal affairs of another empire would destabilize the balance of power. Balance of power. The words were repeated over and over, like a shield. But everyone on Earth could see the truth. Balance was just an excuse for doing nothing. The representatives tried again. They spoke about Earth's own scars. They reminded the galaxy of times when humanity itself had fallen into darkness, when entire communities had been slaughtered by their own kind. They admitted their history openly, not to shame themselves, but to show that they understood the weight of what was happening. But the council did not care. To them, Earth was still new, still a minor voice, still too emotional. One alien elder even leaned back and said coldly, "Your kind is young. You do not yet understand the complexities of civilization." That sentence spread through Earth's networks like a spark. Complexities of civilization. Was this what it meant to be cultured? To look the other way while people were being erased? To act polite in halls of marble while screams echoed across forgotten planets? The protests started small. A few hundred outside the Earth Parliament in Geneva, then a few thousand in New Delhi. By the end of the week, tens of millions stood in streets around the world. They carried no weapons, no hateful slogans, only signs with 3 words: never again anywhere. News anchors covered the marches with raw emotion. Teachers paused their lessons and let students watch. In homes, families spoke quietly about humanity's responsibility. They remembered their grandparents' stories of war and cruelty, and how silence from the world had always made the suffering worse. Across colonies on Mars, Luna, and the orbital stations, the same fire grew. Humans had been trying so hard to look civilized in front of the stars. But what use was culture if it had no courage behind it? On a calm night in Nairobi, a mother who had lost family in past wars was interviewed. She said softly into the camera, "If culture means turning away when people are in pain, then maybe it is better to be uncultured. Maybe it is better to be human." That sentence struck the world. It spread through social media, through broadcasts, through whispered conversations. It gave words to a growing feeling. Earth was done begging for permission to care. Meanwhile, the Alien Council moved on to other business: trade routes, territorial disputes, cultural festivals. The genocide was pushed aside like an uncomfortable detail in the background. To them, it was already yesterday's news, but for Earth, it was the start of something new. In the weeks that followed, meetings on Earth grew tense. Leaders from every nation, every colony, argued deep into the night. Some still wanted to stay cautious, afraid that acting alone would bring disaster. Others slammed their fists on tables, declaring that no disaster could be worse than standing by while innocent lives were destroyed. It was not an easy decision. Humanity was still small compared to the great empires of the galaxy. Their fleets were not endless, their technology not unmatched. But they had something else, something that had carried them through every hardship before. A stubborn refusal to accept injustice as normal. The choice was taking shape. And though no official announcement had been made yet, ordinary people could already feel it in their bones. Earth was reaching a breaking point. The artists, the musicians, the philosophers who once filled Earth's channels with songs and ideas now began to speak with a different tone. They reminded people that true culture is not only art, it is compassion, courage, and sacrifice. They asked the question aloud: what is the value of paintings and symphonies if we let whole civilizations vanish in silence? And as the stars glittered above, the answer began to form, clear and unstoppable. For centuries, humans had fought to rise above their violent past. They had built bridges of peace and culture, hoping the galaxy would see them as refined. But now, faced with silence from those who called themselves civilized, humanity whispered to itself a new truth. If culture means cowardice, then maybe it is time we stop being cultured. The weeks after the Council's refusal felt heavy on Earth. People went about their daily routines, working, commuting, caring for families, but the air carried an unshakable weight. Every news broadcast seemed to circle back to the same tragedy. Every conversation in cafes and schools ended with the same question: why is no one helping? Fresh reports kept coming. Refugee ships drifted across the galaxy, half broken and overcrowded, carrying survivors who looked like shadows of themselves. Some of them reached human colonies. Doctors rushed to care for them, journalists listened to their stories, and translators worked day and night to make their words clear to the public. The testimonies were heartbreaking, but what struck people most was the silence of the wider galaxy. Other civilizations, those with fleets far larger than Earth's, chose to look away. They spoke of diplomacy, of patience, of respecting sovereignty, as if those words could wash away the screams of families who had lost everything. On Earth, anger began to boil. It was not the kind of anger that burned hot and fast. It was the slow, steady fire that grew each time another refugee spoke into a camera, each time another leader from the council shrugged and said, "It is not our place." In crowded streets, protesters carried signs written in dozens of languages. Some said, "We remember." Others said, "Silence is complicity." Everywhere, one sentence kept appearing: "If not us, then who?" At first, governments tried to calm the people. They reminded everyone that Earth was still small, still vulnerable. They warned that rushing into conflict could bring destruction to humanity itself. For a while, that argument held. People were scared of repeating old mistakes, scared of losing everything they had worked so hard to build. But the fear began to lose its grip. Every time images of burned-out colonies reached Earth, the fear was replaced by determination. Teachers showed their students lessons from history, how humanity had once failed to act when others were in danger, and how millions had suffered because of it. Priests and philosophers spoke from pulpits and stages, saying that morality was not measured in art galleries or speeches, but in the courage to protect those who could not protect themselves. Slowly, the tone of public debate shifted. It was no longer about whether Earth should act, but when. In the council chambers, Earth's representatives tried one last time. They stood in the Great Hall, facing rows of alien leaders draped in ceremonial robes, and they begged for unity. They spoke of the dangers of indifference, of how ignoring cruelty today would only allow it to grow tomorrow. But again, their words fell flat. The council chairperson politely thanked them for their passion, then moved the meeting forward to discuss new trade tariffs. For Earth, that was the moment everything changed. When the recording of that session reached the public, the response was electric. People no longer felt sorrow, they felt betrayed. They realized that the galaxy's so-called guardians of culture would never act, not because they could not, but because they chose not to. Across Earth and its colonies, something remarkable happened. Governments that had once argued bitterly with each other began to find common ground. Leaders who had spent years divided by ideology, economy, and ambition sat down together and agreed on one thing: humanity could not stay silent. It was not a sudden declaration. It was not a dramatic speech. It was more like a tide turning, steady and unstoppable. Military planners were called into quiet meetings. Scientists received urgent messages to shift their research priorities. Shipyards that had been building peaceful exploration vessels quietly extended their schedules. The people noticed the change before it was announced. Workers in the orbital docks whispered about new designs being tested. Engineers spoke about old defense systems being upgraded. Soldiers on training fields felt the intensity of their drills sharpen. Everyone knew what it meant, even if no one said the word out loud yet. On the streets, artists captured the mood. Painters filled canvases with images of humanity standing between the stars, not as conquerors but as guardians. Musicians wrote songs that spread like wildfire, songs with steady rhythms that felt like marching steps, songs that reminded listeners that courage was not found in silence. Writers published essays and poems that filled digital screens with the same message: to do nothing is to be guilty too. In one powerful moment, a young refugee stood on a human stage. Her voice was quiet, her hands trembling, but her words carried through every broadcast. We do not ask you to fight for us because you are strong. We ask because you are the only ones who still seem to care. That sentence pierced the heart of Earth. It was no longer about proving humanity's worth to the galaxy. It was about proving humanity's worth to itself. Families gathered around dinner tables and spoke honestly. Parents explained to their children why Earth might have to step into danger. Children asked hard questions. Will people die? Will we lose what we've built? And parents answered as best as they could, with honesty and with hope. The protests changed tone too. Where once they had been filled with despair, now they were filled with resolve. People no longer begged their leaders to act, they demanded it. Crowds chanted not in sorrow but in unity. We will not stand by. We will not stand by. In colonies far from Earth, the same fire spread. On Mars, students painted murals of hands reaching out across the stars. On Luna, miners donated part of their wages to fund relief for refugees. On the orbital stations, workers stayed overtime, volunteering to prepare habitats for those who had nowhere else to go. Humanity, scattered across the solar system, was united in a way it had never been before. The final push came not from leaders, but from the people themselves. A global assembly was broadcast, where voices from every continent and every colony were invited to speak. Farmers, teachers, engineers, doctors, refugees, and elders all told the same story, that silence was no longer acceptable. One elderly man, his voice rough with age, said something that echoed across the world. When I was young, I heard the words never again. I believed them. But now I see those words mean nothing if we only whisper them. To make them real, we must act. The applause that followed could be heard not just in the hall but in living rooms and streets across the planet. Humanity had reached its breaking point. The official announcement would come later. The speeches, the mobilization orders, the strategy, all of that would follow. But in truth, the decision was already made. It was not made by politicians or generals, but by ordinary people who refused to let history repeat itself. That night, as Earth rotated silently under the stars, millions of humans lay awake, staring at the sky. They knew the road ahead would be dangerous. They knew sacrifices would be required. But they also knew something else, something stronger than fear. They would not be remembered as a people who looked away. And though the council halls still gleamed with polished pride, and though the powerful empires still sat comfortably in their silence, Earth was already changing. Humanity's heart had hardened into resolve. The breaking point had arrived. The decision did not come with fireworks or cheering. It came with silence. The kind of silence that falls when a family decides together to take a hard road, knowing there is no turning back. Behind closed doors, Earth's leaders finally agreed. If no one else would stop the killings, then humanity would. The words were spoken carefully, but once they were said, the air in the room changed. Everyone knew there would be no going back to the old days of being seen only as the new, cultured member of the galactic community. For years, humanity had tried to be admired for art, for music, for philosophy. They had wanted to be seen as more than warriors, more than survivors of a violent history. But now those same galleries and concert halls felt hollow. What was the use of art if it could not move hearts to action? What was the use of fine words if they never became deeds? The moment of truth had arrived, and humanity was done pretending that silence was noble. Orders went out quietly at first. Shipyards across the solar system shifted schedules overnight. Civilian projects slowed while engineers began refitting old defense ships for something larger, something bolder. Factories that once made peaceful technology redirected to produce shields, engines, and supplies for fleets. It was not a single government or a single leader pushing this. It was everyone. From the smallest lunar outpost to the biggest cities on Earth, the message was the same. If culture means watching others suffer while pretending to be civilized, then Earth would rather be uncultured. Better to act and be called reckless than to remain silent and be complicit. In classrooms, teachers explained to children why things were changing. They told stories of ancient times when humanity had been divided and had suffered greatly because no one had stood up soon enough. Now, they said, humans had the chance to prove they had learned. The children listened with wide eyes, and for the first time they understood that their future would be written, not in history books, but in the choices being made right now. Artists felt the change as well. Painters who once captured sunsets now painted fleets in motion. Musicians who once wrote love songs now composed hymns of defiance and hope. Poets filled the networks with verses that rang like war drums, not to glorify battle but to remind humanity of its duty. The mood on Earth and its colonies was heavy but united. People knew the risks. Everyone remembered that humanity was not the most powerful civilization. Earth's fleets were strong but not endless. Their technology was good but not unmatched. Against the great empires, humanity was still small, and yet that truth did not weaken their resolve. It sharpened it. Better to stand small and brave, one old worker said in a broadcast, than to sit large and silent. His words spread far and wide, becoming a kind of rallying cry. The first official declaration came weeks later. Standing before the world, Earth's spokesperson addressed not only their own people but the galaxy itself. The speech was simple, without grand poetry or dramatic flair. We asked for help. We begged for unity. None came. So now we will act alone if we must. We will not claim to be cultured while lives are erased. We will not wear the mask of civility while doing nothing. If this makes us uncultured in your eyes, then so be it. We choose to be human first. The words echoed not just in human homes but in alien halls across the stars. Some species laughed at the arrogance. Some scoffed at the idea that Earth could do anything more than make noise. But a few listened closely. They remembered the stories about humanity's stubbornness, how this young species had clawed its way from the brink of destruction time and again. And quietly they began to wonder if maybe, just maybe, Earth meant what it said. Preparation spread everywhere. Scientists worked sleepless nights, turning exploration tools into weapons of defense, inventing new ways to shield ships, new strategies for battle. Engineers in orbital stations walked among towering metal hulls, their hands stained with oil and steel, whispering prayers as they built. Farmers donated food to supply ships. Teachers volunteered in refugee centers. Even children began making small packages for the families who had lost everything, filling them with drawings, letters, and simple gifts. It was not just about war. It was about care. Humanity did not prepare to fight out of hatred, but out of love for those who had been abandoned. And this love was fierce enough to move mountains. The council chambers, meanwhile, reacted with dismissal. Reports came back that alien delegates had laughed openly. Some said Earth would destroy itself. Some said the humans were too dramatic. Others said nothing at all, as if silence itself could erase Earth's determination. But Earth no longer cared about their approval. For too long, humans had craved the galaxy's respect. Now they understood that true respect could never come from pretending to be something they were not. True respect would come from acting on their deepest values no matter the cost. Soldiers trained with focus, not cheering, not shouting, but moving with a calm sense of purpose. They knew what was at stake. They knew they might not return. Yet none hesitated. When asked why they were willing to risk everything, one young soldier said simply, "Because someone has to." Families supported them. Instead of begging them to stay, mothers and fathers hugged their children and whispered words of pride. Siblings sent messages of encouragement. Entire neighborhoods gathered to sing songs and light candles for those departing. It was not just soldiers who prepared. Doctors volunteered to travel with the fleets, ready to heal the wounded. Journalists prepared to record the truth so no one could deny what was happening. Pilots practiced long hours, guiding ships through simulations of battles they knew would come. Humanity was moving as one, like a single heartbeat across planets and stations. The old dream of being cultured had not died. It had transformed. People began to say that culture was not about polished speeches or silent councils. Culture was about compassion, about sacrifice, about standing when it was easier to sit. And so Earth cast off the mask. They no longer sought to appear refined to those who would not listen. Instead, they chose to act in raw, honest humanity. The first fleets began to assemble in orbit. Ships gleamed under the sun. Some old and scarred, others newly built. Crews moved inside them with quiet determination. From Earth's surface, people looked up at the night sky and saw streaks of light as vessels left for the void. It was a moment of pride and fear, a moment no one would forget. For centuries, humanity had looked up at the stars with curiosity and wonder. Now they looked up with purpose. The galaxy watched, some with amusement, some with disbelief, and some with unease. But for humanity, it no longer mattered what others thought. What mattered was simple. They would not let innocent voices vanish into silence. And though the fleets had not yet reached their destination, though the first confrontation still lay ahead, something fundamental had already shifted. Earth was no longer the young species begging to be seen as civilized. Earth was something else now, something far more dangerous to indifference. They had stopped being cultured in the shallow sense. They had chosen to be human. The fleets of Earth did not move with fanfare. They left orbit quietly, one after another, glowing trails across the black sky. There were no celebrations, no parades, no songs of glory. Only silence broken by whispered goodbyes as families watched their loved ones disappear into the stars. No one pretended this was going to be easy. Everyone knew the risk. Humanity was not marching into the unknown for riches or for conquest. They were marching into danger for the sake of those who had been abandoned. That knowledge gave their steps weight but also purpose. The first system they entered was silent, eerily so. Entire planets that once held life now spun in quiet emptiness. Ships drifted without power, their hulls scarred and broken. As Earth's fleets moved through, cameras captured the wreckage and sent it back to every human home. People watched from living rooms and public squares, their hearts heavy but resolute. Then came the survivors. Tiny groups hiding in caves or drifting in broken vessels. Their bodies weak but their eyes alive with a glimmer of hope. When the first human soldiers stepped onto the ground to lift them up, a moment of history was made. Humanity's voice carried across the galaxy in a single broadcast. "We are here. You are not alone anymore." That sentence reached billions. It was replayed in schools, in markets, in crowded stations. And for the first time, the galaxy could not pretend the tragedy was invisible. Humanity had dragged it into the light. The empire responsible reacted quickly. Their fleets arrived in force, bristling with weapons and arrogance. They had grown used to acting without challenge, certain that no one would dare stand against them. But this time was different. This time it was not just words. It was Earth's ships standing in their way. The first clash was sharp and sudden. Explosions lit the dark metal tore, alarms blared across decks. Inside the human ships, men and women worked with steady hands, moving with a calm born not of confidence but of determination. They did not fight for glory. They fought to hold the line long enough for refugees to escape. The Empire expected humans to scatter, to break apart like so many others had before. But the humans held. They used every ounce of their stubbornness, every scrap of creativity. Pilots pulled maneuvers that seemed reckless but turned battles upside down. Engineers patched damage mid-fight with solutions that should not have worked but did. Soldiers on the ground shielded survivors with their own bodies, refusing to abandon even a single child. The galaxy watched through live transmissions. For the first time in generations, the carefully polished image of the Council was cracked. The so-called cultured empires had done nothing but talk. Earth, small and young, had acted. And though their ships bled fire and their soldiers risked everything, they did not stop. One broadcast showed a human officer speaking into the camera after the first battle. His face was tired, his uniform scorched, but his voice was steady. "Do not remember us for fighting. Remember us for refusing to look away." Those words traveled like wildfire. Across alien worlds, ordinary people who had never cared about humans before began to speak differently. They whispered to each other in markets and temples, asking, "If this young species can risk so much, why do our great powers do nothing?" But the Empire was not finished. They struck back harder. determined to crush Earth before its defiance inspired others. Massive fleets poured into the contested zones, their commanders sneering at the thought of teaching humans their place. Yet every time, humanity answered. Their fleets, though smaller, fought with precision. They did not target cities or civilians. They struck only the machines of war, disabling ships, cutting supply lines, rescuing those who had been left behind. Humanity's approach was not blind rage. It was justice carried out with steady hands. Back on Earth, the mood was tense but unbroken. Families followed updates with pounding hearts. Factories worked day and night to send supplies to the front. Children wrote letters that were loaded onto transport ships, small notes of encouragement tucked into food crates and medical kits. Entire neighborhoods gathered in public halls to watch live feeds, cheering when human ships emerged victorious, crying when losses were reported. The cost was real. Ships did not always return. Soldiers did not always come home. The names of the fallen were read aloud every night on broadcasts. Their faces shone across screens, their stories remembered. And yet, instead of breaking the spirit of the people, it strengthened it. The message became clear. Humanity was willing to sacrifice for what was right. Other species could no longer ignore it. Some began quietly sending supplies, pretending they were for trade but making sure they reached human fleets. Others began leaking information, giving Earth valuable intelligence about enemy movements. They did not dare act openly yet, but humanity's courage had lit a spark. The Empire, furious and humiliated, doubled down. They sent messages to the Council, demanding Earth be punished for interfering in internal matters. The Council, trapped by its own inaction, hesitated. They had allowed the genocide to happen. Now Earth had made their silence visible to everyone. To punish humanity would be to admit their own shame, and so the Council did nothing. Again. But the people of the galaxy were no longer fooled. They had seen the difference with their own eyes. While the civilized ones debated in polished halls, Earth was out there, bleeding and fighting, not for conquest, but for compassion. On the front lines, every victory was hard-earned. Ships came back scarred, soldiers came back weary, yet every survivor rescued made the effort worthwhile. One by one, broken families were reunited, children were fed, and refugees began to believe in hope again. The transmissions from these rescues touched every corner of Earth. One image, in particular, became iconic: a human soldier kneeling in the dirt, offering water to a frightened child from another species, their hands trembling as they reached out. That single picture spread farther than any speech ever could. It reminded everyone why this fight mattered. Humanity was no longer trying to prove it was cultured. They were proving something far more important: that compassion is stronger than indifference, and that even a small voice can shake the silence of the stars. As the campaign continued, whispers began spreading in the galaxy's markets and stations. People began calling Earth not the young species, but something else. Some said they were the stubborn ones. Others said they were the guardians. Whatever the name, one thing was clear: humanity had earned a new kind of respect, not through polished culture, but through raw, undeniable courage, and yet everyone knew this was only the beginning. The Empire was still powerful, still dangerous. The road ahead was long. Losses would come. But humanity had already changed the story. The galaxy could no longer say no one cared. The galaxy could no longer pretend silence was civilized. Earth had stood up. And in doing so, they had forced everyone else to see what true culture meant. Not silence, not empty words, but the willingness to act when it mattered most. The war did not end in a single battle. It ended in a series of hard steps, one after another, each carrying its own cost. Humanity's fleets fought not to conquer, but to defend, to rescue, to make sure the silence was broken forever. Every system they entered, every colony they reached carried the same message. Humanity had come, and humanity would not turn away. Slowly, the tide shifted. The empire that had once believed itself untouchable began to lose ground. Their commanders grew frustrated as human fleets outmaneuvered them, not with overwhelming numbers, but with stubborn strategy and clever thinking. They had underestimated Earth, and now the galaxy was watching their humiliation unfold. The turning point came when human forces liberated an entire sector where survivors had been hidden away for months. The broadcast showed families reunited, children laughing for the first time in what felt like ages, and communities rising from the ashes. It was not victory in the traditional sense. It was not about flags or territory. It was victory in the truest human sense. Life had been saved and hope restored. The images reached every corner of Earth. People wept openly in homes and streets. Strangers hugged each other as they watched the news. For the first time, the heaviness in their hearts lifted just a little. Humanity had not only fought, it had protected, and in that protection it had found meaning. The Empire, weakened and disgraced, could no longer hide its crimes. The galaxy had seen too much. Their own allies turned away from them, unwilling to be dragged down by the weight of their cruelty. And at last, under pressure from every side, their leaders were forced to surrender. But for humanity, the fight was not only about ending the violence. It was about making sure justice was seen. Trials were held, broadcast across the stars. The guilty were named not with hatred but with clarity. Survivors stood as witnesses, their voices shaking but strong, telling their story so that no one could ever claim ignorance again. And there, standing alongside them, were humans, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as guardians who had chosen to act when no one else would. Back on Earth, the world changed. The museums and concert halls reopened, but now their walls carried new meaning. Alongside the art and music of the past, there were exhibits telling the story of what had been done. Not just the suffering, but the courage of those who refused to stand by. Children walked through these halls with their teachers, listening to stories of both pain and bravery, and they learned what culture truly meant. Culture was not about silence. It was not about polished speeches in grand halls. Culture was about compassion. It was about the courage to act even when it was dangerous. It was about refusing to accept cruelty as normal. The galaxy took notice. Other species began to question their own leaders. In marketplaces and meeting halls, people spoke openly. If Earth could risk so much for strangers, why did we remain quiet? Slowly, a shift began. Some civilizations passed new laws protecting vulnerable groups. Others began offering real aid to refugees. The Council itself, once a place of hollow words, was forced to rethink what it meant to lead. When humanity returned to the Council chambers, they did not walk in as beggars asking for recognition. They walked in as equals, no, as something greater. They had proven with action what others only spoke about. And though some delegates still looked down their noses, many more looked with quiet respect. The human representative spoke simply. We did not fight because we wanted to. We fought because no one else would. If that makes us uncultured in your eyes, then we accept it. But if culture means compassion, then humanity has never been more cultured than it is today. The chamber was silent. For once there were no smirks, no dismissive glances. Even those who disagreed could not find words to challenge what was said. Back on Earth, life continued. Farmers returned to their fields, workers to their factories, children to their schools. But something had changed forever. Humanity no longer measured itself by whether the galaxy called them cultured. They measured themselves by whether they lived up to their own promise, to never look away from suffering, no matter where it was found. Families who had lost loved ones carried both grief and pride. Communities built monuments not of glory, but of remembrance. Remembrance of the lives saved, the courage shown, and the price paid. And whenever people visited these places, they did not whisper about war. They whispered about humanity's choice to care. In refugee camps, survivors planted gardens and built schools, with help from human volunteers. Children from different species played together, their laughter a reminder that compassion builds bridges where indifference builds walls. And in those small, ordinary moments, the meaning of Earth's stand became clear. The galaxy had seen many wars before. It had seen conquests, rivalries, empires rise and fall. But what humanity had done was different. They had fought not for power, not for land, not for pride, but for something deeper, for the right of every voice to be heard, for the promise that no life should be erased in silence, and that more than any weapon, more than any fleet, changed the stars forever. Years later, when storytellers spoke of these times, they did not focus on the battles or the politics. They spoke of the ordinary people who made extraordinary choices, the families who sent their loved ones to fight, the workers who built ships through sleepless nights, the doctors who healed without rest, the children who wrote letters of hope, and the soldiers who gave everything so others could live. They spoke of a young species that had been mocked as uncultured, yet had shown the galaxy the truest form of culture, compassion in action. And so, When the stars were quiet again and peace settled across the systems, humanity stood taller, not because others finally respected them, but because they had respected themselves. The final lesson was simple, spoken in countless homes across Earth and its colonies. To be cultured is not to sit in silence while others suffer. To be cultured is to care, and if caring makes us different, then let us always be different. Under the endless sky, children looked up at the stars with new eyes. They did not see cold, distant lights. They saw a reminder that once, when the galaxy turned away, humanity chose to step forward. And in that choice, they had not only saved others, they had saved the very meaning of what it was to be human.